I've supported myself since I was 15 and never took a single dollar from my family. By 25, I bought my own house, and that's when my parents sued me, claiming I'd ruined my brother's future. I thought I knew the depths of my parents' favoritism, the endless scoreboard they kept, but nothing could have prepared me for the day they decided to sue me for my own home. Yes, you heard that right. My own family tried to take everything I'd ever worked for, just to hand it to my entitled younger brother. So, let's rewind. I'm 27 now, but this nightmare started simmering when I was about 15. I grew up with this ingrained aversion to owing anyone anything. And honestly, my parents were probably to blame. They had this invisible scoreboard running in their heads always. Every meal, every ride, every single favor they did, it came with a hidden price tag, one they'd pull out months or even years later, like some overboo bill. It made me feel like I had to earn even the most basic parenting, and as a teenager, that kind of constant calculation really messes with your head. Money was always a touchy subject. It wasn't like we were poor. My parents both had decent jobs. But my younger brother, Ryan, he was the golden child. 3 years my junior, and from the second he arrived, our entire family universe revolved around him. Private soccer training, expensive summer camps, designer clothes. Mom and Dad never batted an eye at the cost. But for me, if I wanted anything beyond the absolute essentials, the answer was always the same. You don't need it, or the classic, get a job and buy it yourself. So, that's exactly what I did. While Ryan was off living his best life, playing tournaments or hanging with friends on the weekends, I was busting my butt bussing tables at a local diner at 15. It wasn't glamorous, but that grueling work gave me something invaluable, my own money, and more importantly, my independence. One job led to another, and by the time I graduated high school, I actually had a decent chunk saved up. Enough to pay for community college entirely on my own, without asking my parents for a single penny. I still remember my dad's snide remark about me thinking I was better than everyone else because I didn't need their help. At the time, I just laughed it off, but that comment? It really stuck. College only widened the chasm between me and my family. While I was burning the candle at both ends, juggling 2 part-time jobs, studying relentlessly, Ryan was finding himself. Which, apparently, meant dropping out after 1 semester and bouncing between odd jobs for years, quitting whenever he didn't vibe with the management. My parents, of course, always had a ready excuse. He's just figuring things out, or he's got a lot of potential. And the kicker? You know, he's not like you, Daniel. I started seeing a pattern emerge. My achievements were always downplayed, dismissed as no big deal. But if Ryan so much as showed up for work, it was practically a family celebration. It was infuriating. Fast forward to when I was 24. I finally landed a solid job in tech. It wasn't glamorous at first, but I poured myself into it, learned everything I could, and slowly, I started climbing that corporate ladder. Within a year, I was actually making enough money to seriously consider moving out of my tiny, cramped apartment. I didn't tell my parents right away I knew how they operated. Instead, I quietly started looking at houses. Each open house felt surreal, like I was stepping closer to a dream that had always felt completely out of reach. The day I closed on my first home, I was absolutely shaking with excitement. It wasn't some grand mansion, but it was mine. I had worked for every single brick, every dollar of that down payment. This was my accomplishment. I decided to invite my parents and Ryan over for dinner as a surprise, foolishly thinking, maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud of me. That, I quickly realized, was my first and biggest mistake. The moment they stepped through the door, I saw it in my mom's eyes. Not pride, not happiness, just cold, hard calculation. Her gaze swept over every inch of the house like she was taking inventory for some unspoken purpose. My dad immediately made a joke about me secretly winning the lottery. And Ryan? He barely spoke. He just wandered around, casing the place, a strange, possessive glint in his eyes. The only genuine warmth came from my aunt, who kept saying how impressed she was. But as soon as we sat down to eat, the passive-aggressive comments began. "It's nice," my mom started, but don't you think it's a bit much for someone your age? Ryan, ever the echo, chimed in, yeah, you probably could have helped out with other things instead of splurging on this. I slowly put my fork down. What other things? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My mom gave me that look, like I was supposed to be a mind reader. Your brother's been talking about going back to school, she said, her voice dripping with expectation. But you know how expensive that is. We thought maybe, well, you've got this big house now. You could have chipped in a little to help him get a head start. It hit me like a physical slap. They hadn't offered a single cent of help for my down payment, my furniture, my bills, nothing. But the second I had something of my own, it was already mentally earmarked for Ryan. I fought to keep my voice steady. I worked for this, I told them. I didn't take anything from you. Why should I be expected to pay for Ryan's choices? The air in the room became thick with tension. My dad mumbled something about family helping family, and Ryan actually looked at me like I had personally betrayed him. I ended that dinner abruptly. As they were leaving, my mom gave me a hug that felt more like a squeeze, a possessive grip, and whispered, "Don't be selfish, Daniel. We'll talk about this again." I foolishly thought it might just blow over. I was so wrong. Over the next few weeks, the pressure mounted. My mom's calls were laced with manipulative comments. Ryan's been looking at classes, but we just can't make it work without some help. And the veiled jab. It's such a shame when people in the family have the means to help and just don't. My dad, meanwhile, would constantly bring up every supposed sacrifice they'd made for me growing up, which was truly laughable, considering how little financial support I'd actually received. The final straw before everything truly exploded arrived one Sunday afternoon. I got a text from Ryan. "We need to talk. Come by." I, stupidly, thought maybe he wanted to apologize, or at least explain himself. Instead, when I arrived, both my parents were there, sitting at their kitchen table. Spread out before them were college brochures, tuition breakdowns, and a literal, detailed proposal for how much I could reasonably contribute to Ryan's education over the next 4 years. I actually laughed out loud. It was so utterly absurd. "You seriously made a payment plan for me, for my brother?" I asked, disbelief dripping from my voice. My mom's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a joke, Daniel. This is his future. If you care about family, you'll do this." And then Ryan, with zero shame, chimed in, "I mean, it's not like you don't have the money. You bought a whole house, man. Why should you get to have all that while I'm stuck here?" Something in me just snapped. I stood up, told them in no uncertain terms that I wouldn't be giving them a single cent, and walked straight out. I thought maybe they'd be furious, maybe stop talking to me for a while. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't have possibly imagined, was just how far they'd actually go next. Because just 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mail. From a lawyer. As I read it, my hands started shaking again, but this time, it wasn't with excitement over a new home. It was with pure, unadulterated rage. I must have read that letter a dozen times before the impossible truth finally sank in. My parents. My own flesh and blood. They were suing me. The claim was some convoluted nonsense about willfully depriving a dependent family member of necessary opportunities. The dependent, of course, being Ryan. They were framing it like my refusal to fund his second attempt at college was the same as actively taking money from him, blocking his future. It was so utterly outrageous, I genuinely thought it had to be a bluff. The letter demanded a settlement, an amount suspiciously identical to the tuition costs they'd laid out on their kitchen table. It even hinted at emotional damages Ryan had suffered because I had dared to flaunt my success in his face. I sat there at my dining table, my coffee growing cold, just repeating to myself, this can't be real. Surely they wouldn't actually go through with it. But oh, they did. Within a week, my mom started calling me daily, her tone a whiplash blend of guilt and anger. One day, it was, "Daniel, you're tearing this family apart. Is a little generosity really worth losing us over?" The next, "Your brother's devastated. He feels like you want him to fail." She'd cry on the phone, sometimes for agonizing minutes, just to manipulate me into feeling like I was crushing her. Ryan, on the other hand, was doubling down on his entitlement. He started posting vague, dramatic jabs on social media, Some people only care about themselves, even if it ruins others' lives, complete with sad emojis and inspirational quotes about family loyalty. Naturally, his friends and extended family, most of whom had no idea of the full story, would flock to the comments, offering sympathy. "That's so messed up, so sorry you're going through this." He was actively staging a pity party, milking it for all it was worth. I also started noticing my parents subtly twisting the narrative to our relatives. At a cousin's birthday party, my aunt pulled me aside, concerned. "I just wish you and Ryan could work this out," she said. "He's been so down since you bought that house." When I pressed her, she explained, "Well, your parents told us you refused to help him after making all this money." There was no mention of how I'd been entirely on my own since I was a teenager or Ryan's string of blown opportunities. Just their carefully edited, family-friendly version, painting me as cold and selfish. It reached a point where I dreaded every family event. At my grandmother's Sunday lunch, I overheard my dad telling a neighbor that I'd gotten too big for my boots and forgot where I came from. I tried to let it roll off my back, but it was incredibly hard. They weren't just painting me as the villain, they were erasing me. Years of struggle, every sacrifice I'd made, every hour of overtime, none of it counted. The only thing that mattered was that I wasn't bending to their will. Then one night, Ryan actually showed up at my house, completely unannounced. He didn't even bother to knock. He just stood outside, relentlessly ringing my doorbell until I finally opened it. He looked so smug, like he'd been rehearsing a speech. "You know you're going to lose, right?" he said, so casually. "Mom and Dad have the lawyer, and the whole family's on their side. It'll be easier if you just pay up now and save yourself the embarrassment." His sheer arrogance was unbelievable. I told him to leave, but he just stood there, so I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me. We stood there on my front porch, him with that infuriating half-smirk, me trying desperately to keep my voice level. "You are not entitled to my money, Ryan," I told him, every word deliberate. "You've had chance after chance, and you've thrown every single one away. This is on you, not me." That's when he uttered something that truly lodged itself deep in my brain. "You only got here because you had it easier than me," he whined. "Mom and Dad were harder on me. I deserve a fair shot, too. Easier." He actually believed my life had been easier. I just stared at him for a long, stunned second before finally saying, "If you think I had it easy, you clearly weren't paying attention." Then I turned, went back inside, and locked the door, my blood boiling. From that night on, things ratcheted up even further. My parents stopped calling me directly, instead resorting to going through other family members, aunts, uncles, even my sweet grandmother. I'd get voicemails like, "Sweetheart, your mom says this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe if you sent your brother a little something to get started, we could all move on." Or, "Daniel, you know your father's blood pressure isn't good. This stress isn't helping." Every single one was a calculated attempt to wear me down, to chip away at my resolve. Meanwhile, the absurd lawsuit was grinding forward. I had to hire my own lawyer just to defend myself from my own family. Every document that came through had their names on it, my parents, my brother, in cold, black and white. It didn't matter that it was preposterous, or that I knew I would ultimately win. The sheer emotional weight of it was absolutely crushing. At night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the same people who were supposed to protect me had transformed into this. And then came the truly chilling moment when I realized they weren't just trying to extract money from me. They were aiming for something much, much bigger. It started with a voicemail from my realtor, of all people. She sounded incredibly concerned. She'd received a strange inquiry about my house, asking if it was available for purchase or rental, because the current occupant might not be there much longer. She didn't give me a name, but I didn't need one. There were only 3 people who knew exactly how to hit me where it would hurt the most. I called her back immediately, and she confirmed my darkest suspicion. The inquiry hadn't come from some random stranger. It had been my mother. She had actually called my realtor, pretending to be a friend of the family, asking about my house as if she was just innocently curious. But my realtor, sensing something deeply off, pressed her a bit. That's when my mom hinted that I might not be able to keep the property much longer, and it would be a shame if it went to waste when another family member could use it. My chest tightened, a cold dread spreading through me. Another family member. There was no mistaking who she meant. They weren't just trying to extort money, they were meticulously setting the stage to take my house. I sat there at my kitchen table, phone still in hand, staring out the window for what felt like hours. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This wasn't just Ryan's entitlement or my parents' guilt trips. This was a deliberate, calculated move to undermine everything I had worked for. The place I had fought tooth and nail to buy, the one true symbol of my independence from them. They were already circling it like vultures. The more I thought about it, the more every little piece clicked into place. That first dinner, my mom's calculating eyes scanning the place, her comment about it being a bit much for someone my age, Ryan's digs about me having all that while he was stuck here. It had all been leading up to this. The lawsuit wasn't just about tuition. If they could paint me as someone who unfairly deprived Ryan, they could spin it into legal leverage over my most significant asset, my house. And then came the real gut punch. I got an email from my lawyer forwarding a newly filed amendment to their case. It chillingly claimed that part of the reason they were seeking damages was because the defendant's current living situation was acquired through funds that could have been allocated to support the plaintiff's education and career development. In other words, they were now legally arguing that my house itself was evidence of my selfishness and misallocation of resources. They weren't just hinting at it anymore. They were putting it in legal writing. They wanted my home. That night, I called my mom. I hadn't planned a single word. I just needed to hear her voice, to somehow understand how she could possibly justify this level of betrayal. She picked up, her voice sickeningly sweet, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "Daniel, I was just telling your aunt how proud I am of you." "Cut it, Mom," I snapped, my voice shaking with fury. "Why did you call my realtor?" There was a heavy pause. Then, without missing a beat, she sighed. "I was just looking out for the family. If things don't go your way in court, it would be better if the house stayed with someone in the family instead of strangers. You know Ryan would take good care of it." My jaw clenched so hard it ached. "You're actually planning for me to lose my home before the case is even over? You've already decided I'm guilty." "It's not about guilt, Daniel," she countered, her voice now edged with impatience. "It's about doing what's right for your brother. He's been through so much. So much." I cut in, my temper finally breaking. "He's had every opportunity handed to him while I've been on my own since I was a teenager. I worked for this house. You never helped me, not once. And now you think you can just take it?" Her tone shifted, sharper now, venomous. "Don't be dramatic. You wouldn't be where you are without how we raised you. We made sacrifices, too. This is your chance to give back." Give back. That phrase hit me like a brick wall. It was the exact same thing she'd said when I was 16 and refused to hand over half my paycheck to help with household expenses while Ryan was spending his allowance on video games. The same phrase she'd used when I declined to co-sign a car loan for him at 21. To her, my success wasn't mine. It was a debt I owed them, a balance they could collect whenever they pleased. I hung up without another word. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, a sickening twist in my gut, a potent mix of profound betrayal and crystal-clear clarity. In that moment, I finally understood they were never going to stop. It didn't matter how much I explained, how much I showed them I'd built my life without their help. In their twisted minds, Ryan's failures were my responsibility to fix, and anything I had was fair game. The only justice they believed in was one where Ryan came out on top, even if it meant tearing me down to absolute nothing. The very next week, things somehow managed to get even worse. I found out from a mutual friend that Ryan had actually been bragging to a couple of his buddies that my house would be his soon. One of them, apparently confused, asked if I was selling, and Ryan had just smirked and said, "Not exactly. Let's just say Mom and Dad are handling it." Hearing that absolutely broke something inside me. I had spent years swallowing little jabs, letting them chip away at my achievements because I always wanted to keep the peace. But now they were actively trying to strip me of the one thing that symbolized all those grueling years, All those nights I'd gone without so I could save for a future no one else believed in. And that's when I made a decision. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But I wasn't going to fight it their way. I was going to make damn sure that when I pushed back, they'd regret ever thinking they could take what was rightfully mine. The weeks that followed felt like wading through thick quicksand. Each day another blow, another stark reminder that my own family had actively positioned themselves as my enemies. My lawyer was doing his best, but every new legal filing from their side felt like a punch to the gut. The language was so cold, so calculated. It was like they'd erased me as a son and rewritten me as some faceless opponent they just needed to defeat in court. I stopped sleeping properly. Some nights, I'd lie awake for hours, my mind trapped in endless loops. Asterisk, what if they actually won? What if they took the house? Where would I go? What would I have left? Asterisk, my home had always been my sanctuary, the first place where I could truly close the door and know no one could barge in and tell me what to do. Now, even sitting in my own living room felt tense, like the walls weren't mine anymore. My work started to suffer too. I'd catch myself zoning out in meetings, missing deadlines because my head was buried in legal paperwork. My boss noticed, and while he was sympathetic when I vaguely explained it was a family legal matter, I could sense his patience wouldn't last forever. I'd worked so incredibly hard to build a reputation as reliable, as someone who could handle anything, and now I was watching it all crack. But the absolute worst part was the isolation. My parents had done such a thorough job of controlling the narrative that most of our extended family believed I was the cruel, selfish one. Invitations to birthdays, dinners, even casual get-togethers, they all started to dry up. I'd see photos posted online, big, smiling group shots with captions like, "Family first," and there would be Ryan, grinning proudly in the middle, my parents beaming on either side. I wasn't even mentioned anymore. One night, I opened my fridge and realized I hadn't done a proper grocery run in weeks. I'd been living off takeout and whatever I could grab from the corner store because I just didn't have the energy. Standing there in the dim light of the fridge, staring at a single carton of eggs and half a bottle of orange juice, a crushing wave of hopelessness washed over me. It wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It was the soul-crushing feeling that no matter what I did, I'd always be the outsider in my own family. But then, in that absolute low moment, something else sparked. I remembered being 15, standing behind that greasy diner counter on a Friday night, my hands raw from scrubbing dishes, knowing I had to be up early for a double shift the next day. I'd done that for years, without a safety net, without anyone cheering me on. Every single step I'd taken since then had been fueled by my refusal to give up when it would have been so much easier to quit. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. I stopped answering their calls. I instructed my lawyer to handle all communication, no matter how trivial, so I wouldn't have to hear their voices or read their incessant, manipulative messages. I started meticulously going through my finances, making sure every asset was locked down, every account secured. I pulled my credit report, checking for anything suspicious. I even installed a full security system on my house, just in case Ryan decided to make another unannounced visit. In public, I projected calm. If anyone asked how I was doing, I'd just offer a vague handling it and swiftly change the subject. But privately, I was constructing something, a meticulous plan. I realized that if I fought them head-on, they'd simply keep twisting the narrative until I looked like the aggressor. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to let them dig their own hole, then make absolutely sure they couldn't climb out of it. The first step was gathering undeniable proof, not just for court, but for my own sanity. Proof of every manipulative call, every backhanded comment, every single instance they tried to undermine me. If I was going to fight back, I wanted it all in black and white. Still, I kept my head down. Outwardly, it looked like they'd broken me, beaten me into silence. And maybe that's exactly what they believed, which was exactly what I wanted them to think. Because when you're at rock bottom, no one ever sees you coming back. And I was going to make sure my return hit them harder than they ever expected. It's truly strange how, once you stop feeding someone's drama, they start believing you've just disappeared. My parents and Ryan seemed to interpret my silence as definitive proof that they were winning. In reality, it granted me the crucial space I needed to rebuild. Not just my legal defenses, but my entire life. The first tangible shift came at work. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, and I immediately braced myself for bad news. Instead, he closed the door and said, "Look, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, Daniel, but I know you're good at what you do. If you can focus, I'm willing to put you on a project that could lead to a promotion." It was like someone had cracked a window in a suffocating room, a sudden, glorious rush of fresh air. I threw myself into that project. Long hours, meticulous planning, going that extra mile. I wasn't just trying to prove myself to my boss anymore. I was reminding myself what I was capable of. And it worked. The project was a resounding success, and a few weeks later, I was offered the promotion. With it came a significant pay bump, enough that my financial cushion grew thicker, my savings healthier. It didn't erase the gnawing stress of the lawsuit, but it made me feel secure again, grounded. Meanwhile, my lawyer was quietly, methodically picking apart their flimsy case. He'd managed to unearth records of Ryan's past employment history, his multiple failed college attempts, even old messages where my parents openly admitted they'd spoiled him too much. Each piece was another unraveling thread in the fabric of their blatant hypocrisy. I didn't gloat, not yet. I just filed it all away, letting it pile up. Outside of work, I started actively focusing on myself again. I rejoined the gym I'd quit months ago, partly to clear my head, partly to remind myself that my body didn't have to carry the overwhelming weight of all this stress. I started cooking proper meals again. Nothing fancy, but there was something incredibly therapeutic about chopping vegetables and actually sitting down to eat. I also began reconnecting with people I'd drifted from. Not the family members who'd bought into my parents' distorted version of events. I left them to their group photos and fake smiles. Instead, I reached out to old friends, coworkers I trusted, people who knew me, without the filter of my family's vicious gossip. Little by little, I rebuilt a supportive circle around me, one that wasn't poisoned by their manipulation. And then, something truly unexpected happened. I was invited to speak at a local networking event for young professionals. Someone had seen the incredible results of my project at work and thought my career path was inspiring. Standing on that stage, telling my story, the professional one, not the messy personal parts, I had this powerful realization. I wasn't the powerless kid busting tables anymore. I had built something real, something substantial. And no matter what my family thought they could take from me, they couldn't take that. With every win, big or small, I felt the balance shifting. My parents still had their lawsuit hanging over me, but outside of that courtroom, their control was steadily slipping. They couldn't guilt me into calls I wouldn't answer, couldn't twist my words if I simply didn't give them any. They had to go through lawyers for everything now, which meant no more surprise ambushes at my front door or accidental run-ins at family gatherings. The best part? While they were busy burning bridges with me, they were also steadily wearing down their own credibility within the wider family. A mutual acquaintance let slip that some relatives were starting to openly question why my parents were dragging me through court instead of, helping Ryan actually get his life together. Apparently, Ryan had been bragging so openly about getting the house that even people who were initially on their side were starting to see how truly awful it looked. That was when I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was gaining ground. My career was stronger, my finances were secure, and I had allies who saw through the lies. I was finally in a position where I didn't have to simply react to their moves. I could plan my own. And as much as I wanted to strike back right away, I forced myself to wait. Because timing, I realized, was everything. Let them think I was just living my life, moving on. Let them keep underestimating me. Because the next time I made a move, it wouldn't just protect what was mine. The true turning point, the moment everything clicked into place, came on a Tuesday afternoon of all days. I was leaving a client meeting when my phone buzzed with an email from my lawyer. The subject line read, "Discovery request, opposing counsel error." Inside was a forwarded thread, a gold mine. My parents' lawyer had accidentally copied my attorney on an email chain that was meant to be purely internal to their side. It was mostly boring logistics, timelines, filing deadlines. But buried halfway down, there was a message from my mother to their lawyer that made my pulse quicken with a surge of adrenaline. She'd written, in her own words, "We need to make sure Daniel's house is included in any settlement. Ryan has already been in touch with a realtor friend who can list it as soon as it's signed over. This is the cleanest way to ensure he gets a fresh start." There it was, in black and white. Irrefutable proof. The lawsuit was never about helping Ryan get an education. It was, and always had been, about transferring my house into his name. My lawyer practically hummed with energy when we spoke that evening. "This changes everything, Daniel," he said, barely containing his excitement. "They've essentially admitted to ulterior motives. We can absolutely use this." But I didn't want to just use it to defend myself. I wanted to turn it into the very foundation of something much bigger, something that would dismantle their ability to pull this kind of stunt ever again. Around the same time, work presented me with another incredible opportunity. My promotion had put me in charge of a small team, but now I was being offered a cross-department leadership role on a high-visibility project. It came with two major perks: significantly more income and crucial connections with senior executives in industries far beyond my current reach, the kind of people who could, if necessary, open doors I didn't even know existed. I accepted without a second thought. Not only did this strengthen my financial position even further, but it also gave me flexibility, the ability to quietly channel resources exactly where I wanted them. And one of the very first things I did was hire a private investigator. I didn't want anything illegal or invasive. I just wanted the unvarnished truth. I wanted to know exactly what Ryan had been doing while his future supposedly hung in the balance, and whether my parents had a history of pulling similar manipulative moves with other relatives. The investigator did not disappoint. 2 weeks later, I had a thick folder on my desk. Inside were social media posts from accounts Ryan thought were private, showing him on lavish trips, buying expensive electronics, and even test driving luxury cars during the very months he'd been claiming he was barely scraping by. There were also property records showing my parents had, years ago, tried to pressure my late aunt into selling them a piece of land for a fraction of its true value, something that had caused a deep rift no one ever talked about anymore. The more I read, the clearer my path became. I didn't just need to win the case. I needed to systematically dismantle the narrative they'd built, piece by agonizing piece, in front of an audience that truly mattered. To do that, I started laying groundwork, quietly. I reached out to a few trusted family members who had remained neutral, sharing just enough information to plant undeniable seeds of doubt about my parents' version of events. I made sure my financial records, my employment history, and proof of my complete independence since I was a teenager were meticulously documented, time-stamped, and ready to be presented to anyone who needed to see them. And the best part? That incriminating email chain wasn't the only mistake they'd made. My PI had also managed to uncover a conversation, legally recorded in a public setting, where Ryan actually bragged to a friend at a bar that he'd finally found a way to cash in on having a rich brother. The friend, bewildered, asked if I'd agreed to it. And Ryan, with a sickening laugh, replied, "No, man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and be set for years." I listened to that recording 3 times in a row, each listen bringing the same cold, unyielding clarity. They thought they were closing in, but in reality, they'd already handed me every single tool I needed to break them wide open. All I had to do now was choose the perfect, most devastating moment to pull the pin. I waited, not out of hesitation, but because I knew the most devastating strike wouldn't be a loud, angry blow. It would be a quiet, precise one. My parents and Ryan were still moving full steam ahead with their case, completely oblivious to the fact that they'd already laid the meticulous groundwork for their own undoing. The court date was rapidly approaching, and with it came the pretrial conference, the meeting where both sides would lay out their strongest positions to gauge whether a settlement was even possible. This, I decided, was my stage. When we walked into the conference room, my parents were already there, with Ryan sitting smugly between them. My mother gave me that self-satisfied smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. My dad avoided my eyes, a silent, theatrical show of mock disappointment. Ryan, of course, leaned back in his chair, radiating an air of utter confidence, like he was already signing the deed to my house. The mediator began with pleasantries, then asked my lawyer to speak first. We had agreed beforehand, no emotion, no long, dramatic speeches, just cold, hard facts. My lawyer slid a thin binder across the table to their side. This, he said, his voice calm and clear, is the complete documentation of my client's financial independence since the age of 15. Employment records, tax returns, proof of tuition payments, and property purchase receipts. You'll note not a single cent came from his parents at any point. Ryan snorted quietly, but my lawyer didn't even flinch. He flipped the binder open to a carefully flagged page. And here, he said evenly, is an email from the plaintiffs, in their own words, confirming that this lawsuit's primary goal is to obtain the defendant's home for transfer to another party. My mother's face strained of color so fast it was almost comical, her composure utterly shattering. My dad's lips pressed into a thin, tight line. Ryan sat forward abruptly, trying to read the page, his arrogant confidence visibly wobbling. And lastly, my lawyer stated, pressing a button on his laptop. A short audio clip began to play. Ryan's voice filled the silent room, loud and clear, *, no man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and be set for years. * silence. You could practically hear the ticking of the wall clock. My lawyer let that damning silence hang for a good 5 seconds before finally saying, given these facts, we believe the court will not only dismiss this frivolous case, but will find ample grounds for filing a countersuit for damages, including all legal fees and significant reputational harm. The mediator cleared his throat, his gaze landing heavily on their lawyer. Do you wish to respond? Their lawyer's face was tight, his jaw working furiously as if he were chewing on nails. He leaned towards my parents, whispering urgently. My mother shook her head rapidly, her eyes starting to me with something that looked almost like genuine fear. Ryan muttered something under his breath that made my dad glare at him sharply. Finally, their lawyer straightened up, his shoulders slumped. We're willing to withdraw the lawsuit, he said stiffly, with each party covering their own legal fees. My lawyer didn't even glance at me before replying, his voice cutting through the tension. That's unacceptable. We have clear evidence of malicious intent and will absolutely proceed with our countersuit unless we receive a written apology, a public retraction of all prior defamatory statements made against my client, and full reimbursement of his legal costs. Ryan's head snapped towards my parents, his eyes wide with a desperate anger. We're not, yes, we are. My mother cut in, her voice tight and defeated. And that was it. In that room, they caved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at Ryan as he sat there, visibly fuming. I simply let the undeniable truth, the meticulously gathered paperwork, speak for me. By the end of that week, the clumsy, insincere apology letter landed in my inbox, and the reimbursement check cleared shortly after. But that wasn't the true revenge. The real blow, the truly satisfying part, came when I simply sent copies of that apology and all the damning incriminating evidence to the handful of relatives who had so coldly iced me out over the past year. No explanation, just the documents. Within days, the phone calls started coming, not from my parents, but from those very same relatives, awkwardly checking in, clearly realizing they'd bet on the wrong horse. I didn't answer most of them, because the point of this, I realized, wasn't to win them back. It was to make damn sure they understood that I didn't need them, and that trying to take me down only made me stronger. The fallout was swift, and it was spectacularly ugly. Though, for once, none of it was mine to deal with. Word of what had truly happened spread through the family like wildfire. My aunt, the one who'd been so genuinely impressed with my house that first day, called me, half angry, half stunned. They tried to take your home, she hissed, from their own son. She wasn't the only one. Cousins, uncles, even my grandmother, people who had stayed silent for months were suddenly, vehemently, talking. The family group chat that I'd been quietly removed from turned into an absolute battlefield. Screenshots of the apology letter started popping up, and every time someone tried to defend my parents, another relative would instantly drop a quote from that email or that chilling recording of Ryan bragging. For the first time in my entire life, the golden image my parents had so carefully constructed for themselves cracked, publicly and irrevocably. They stopped showing up to family gatherings, not because they weren't invited, but because they simply couldn't stand the barrage of questions and the thinly veiled judgment. My mother, who had once so relished being the absolute center of attention, started avoiding calls from her own siblings. My dad became quieter, grayer, somehow, no longer the booming, self-assured man who used to scoff at my independence. And Ryan? He took it the hardest. His so-called friends, the ones he'd bragged to about cashing in, started actively distancing themselves. Without the house, without the settlement, he had nothing, absolutely nothing, to show for the months he'd spent circling me like a shark. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved out of my parents' house for a bit, then quietly returned when rent and bills proved too much for him to handle. The smugness I'd seen in his eyes at that pre-trial conference was utterly gone. Now, when our paths occasionally cross, usually at some unavoidable, distant family obligation, he barely makes eye contact. The reimbursement check covered every cent of my legal fees, a satisfying practical victory. But it's the apology letter that I've kept, tucked away in a drawer. Not because I need its validation. I don't, but because it's definitive proof. Proof that no matter how much they tried to rewrite history, there was one undeniable moment where they were forced to admit they were wrong. I didn't seek reconciliation. I didn't move past it for the sake of some false family harmony. Instead, I simply continued to build upon the life I'd been creating for myself. Work kept growing, my circle of trusted friends stayed tight, and my home remained exactly where it belonged, mine. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch in the quiet of the evening, I think about that first dinner when I invited them over, back when I harbored that naive hope they might actually be proud. I think about how quickly their masks came off when they saw what I'd built without them. And I realized that the real victory wasn't just keeping my house or winning the case. It was proving, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that I never needed them to succeed. And that no matter what they tried, they could never take that away. And that's when I lean back, a genuine smile spreading across my face, and think, this home will never, ever have their name on it.